It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to our webinar this evening. This is the second in the One Future One Vision series. The topic for tonight is development with decency. For those who are not familiar with the One Movement, this is a network of trade unions working together at county level across all sectors and workplaces, which includes One Cork, One Galway, 15 trades councils from Letterkenny to Cork and from here in Wexford as far as Drogheda. I hope you will find the next hour or so very informative and thought-provoking as we deal with issues that are extremely close to our hearts here in Wexford, but also of vital national importance. Last year at the ICTU Biennial Conference, I had the privilege of speaking on a motion concerning Rosslare Europort, which was proposed by ourselves here in Wexford Trades Council. That motion called on the government to maximise the potential of Rosslare Europort, given its strategic location as the nearest Irish port to mainland Europe. It is our belief that Rosslare can and should become a key asset for the state and provide a direct and speedy route to mainland Europe post-Brexit, thus avoiding the inevitable delays and chaos that we have seen at British ports of late. We also asked that Rosslare would be designated as a Tier 1 port by government and that EU assistance be sought to develop the port and surrounding area to reflect the economic implications of being an island nation on the edge of Europe. Rosslare Europort has huge potential for new trade opportunities for the south and the east of this country, including the potential for new sea routes and foreign direct investment, and it can play a vital role for Ireland in a post-Brexit landscape. Furthermore, we called on the government at that time to resolve the issue of the ownership of Rosslare Europort. Before I kick off and introduce the panellists for this evening, some minor housekeeping issues. All microphones and cameras are switched off, apart from the person that is speaking at the time, and this is to minimise the sound disruption for this webinar. However, we are encouraging plenty of participation and hope that you will have some questions for our panellists. No doubt you will. I would ask that you submit your questions through the Q&A or the chat box on the screen, direct to myself, and I will read them then at the very end, and the panelists will give their answers. We have three wonderful keynote speakers with us tonight, and hopefully they will provide us with much food for the next hour or so. I will introduce our speakers. The first person up tonight is Mr. Ken Fleming. Ken has been a trade union official since 1990 and a former bus worker. Ken joined the International Transport Workers Federation in 2005. He was a recipient of the Mother Jones Award in 2017 for his humanitarian work on behalf of migrants. Ken has identified some 31 cases of human trafficking, all of which was accepted by the state, and who have entered into the Trafficking Protection Programme here in Ireland. Ken retired from SIPTU on the 18th of November this year, but intends to carry on work in Ireland on behalf of the Irish Transport Workers Federation. Our second speaker tonight is Esther Lynch. Esther was elected Deputy General Secretary of the European Trade Union Confederation, ETUC, at the Vienna Conference in May 2019, after 4 years as Confederal Secretary. She has extensive trade union experience at Irish, European and international levels, starting with her election as a shop steward in the early 1980s. Before coming to ETUC, she was the Legislation and Social Affairs Officer with the Irish Congress of Trade Unions here in Ireland, where she took part in negotiations on Ireland's national social partner agreements. Esther's responsibilities now as General Secretary include social dialogue, collective bargaining, wage policy, trade union rights, gender equality and Brexit. And last but certainly not least, he needs no introduction to us here in Wexford, Mr. Brendan Howland, Labour TD for Wexford, Brexit spokesperson and former leader of the Labour Party, who has been a fantastic advocate and representative for us here in Wexford and continues to push the developments of Rosslare Port. So now, with further ado, I'll hand you over to our first speaker, Mr. Ken Fleming. Thank you.
Can you hear me? You can? Yeah? Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Ken.
Hazel, a million thanks for giving me the opportunity to reconnect with the people of Wexford. I forgot to mention in the short note I sent you in that I was actually the Wicklow County Secretary for 18 months in 2001 and 2002, and had great crack dealing with most of the North Wexford people towards Wicklow in Glenealy and Kerry Foods and all those people. Great bunch of lads. And when women, when they come up with the term mountain men, which is when I was doing the work with the Wicklow County Council and the Stop Go people, I met some of the greatest, strongest trade unionists I've ever worked with in the 33 years I was in SIPTU, and I mean, hats off to those people. But anyway, in relation to the ITF, and in particular, I suppose, Brexit, I'd look at it completely different, nothing to do with economics, purely on the basis of workers' rights and the exploitation of those individuals. And unfortunately, Wexford is no different to any of the other counties in the 32 counties, as far as that. Employers, when given the opportunity, can turn into the most ruthless individuals that you could ever come across when it comes to profiteering on the backs of workers. Now, when I got the job in 2005, my primary role was to deal with merchant ships, and I was Googling tonight to see what sort of work I had done in Wexford. And in my early days, we had a ship in New Ross, and it was called the MV Lillian, Russian-owned, flagged in Belize. And when a ship is flagged in a particular country, it operates only by the standards of that country. So I need say no more about Belize. But anyway, they got themselves into trouble with a bit of rust on their cargo, which was steel. A local steel company wouldn't accept it. And we got a shout. We went down. It was a non-trade union vessel. And she was parked, moored along the quay wall down at the old customs office there in New Ross. And I'll never forget it. We were there for months. And the people of New Ross were absolutely brilliant in relation to the support with food and clothes. They welcomed the lads into the community for the period. And they waved them off when we left, $100,000 richer at the end of 3 months. But we had no money in the ITF, and SIPTU couldn't possibly get into a situation where we were feeding and clothing people. And the community in New Ross made it absolutely possible for us to hold out for as long as it possibly could to get the money that was owed to us by the workers. Now, we've had reams of those examples, but sadly, I have to say I was kind of happy to retire from SIPTU, because since 2015, when the Guardian finally had this international circulation and they outed the Irish fishing industry as being the most despicable industry in relation to the treatment of migrant workers in Ireland. And I see by your face, Hazel, because you're in Wexford, and there are fishing vessels the length and breadth of your coast, as there are in Wicklow, that are involved in the exploitation of workers. Not them all now, but certainly a concerning amount of them. Now, it brings me to this subject of human trafficking, and it's good that Brendan is part of the panel. The message I want to give here is that we in Ireland, we operate off a derivative of the stature dukes of the UK because of our relationship and the colonisation that took place here in Ireland. And the laws are generally the same, spoken with a slightly different twang in English. And despite the fact that we operate under a similar set of circumstances, legally wise, as the UK is overwhelmed with cases of human trafficking, from prostitution to exploitation to forced labour, and it's in tens of thousands, where Ireland have only dealing with cases that were referred generally by the trade union movement. In England, they have reams and reams of case law and examples of prosecutions, successive prosecutions that have carried serious sentences, 10, 15 years. That case in Hull 4 or 5 years ago, where some Irish people were involved, they were jailed between 12 and 15 years. In Ireland, not a single case has been brought, other than one case where it was alleged that a young lady was trafficked here for the purposes of prostitution. have a state with a DPP that's in a state of paralysis. They don't know how to affect their own laws. We have the Maritime Survey Office that is failing miserably to police the industry, go on board boats, speak to migrant workers that are here illegally to begin with, and then they're able to legalise their status as a result of a contract system that we brought in as a result of our pressures. And yet we can have a situation where 12 WRC cases were taken last year, and we recovered in excess of €140,000 in owed wages on the basis of the national minimum wage, because the lads are entitled to nothing more than the national minimum wage. So to sum it up, Rosslare becoming the port or the bridge to Europe, that will affect the situation that exists in Calais, and we see it on the news of all these unfortunate migrants that are travelling and walking from the other side of the world, trying to get into Europe to make a better life for themselves, hiding in the backs of lorries going into Dover. We will now become that target. And unfortunately, the real concern for me is that should some of those individuals make it here, their lives in Ireland in certain circumstances are worse than what they've left at home. And we have been to the High Court. We took an injunction against the Minister for Justice last year. We lost it. Uncared of for a trade union to do something on the basis that we couldn't get any political support. We couldn't get any community support, because these situations are inherently connected with the local community. The boat is in this beautiful, picturesque fishing village. The next thing you'll see is the spiral of the Catholic Church, and I'm not a church basher. I'm actually a Catholic myself. The next thing you'll see then is the boat owner sponsoring the local football team. The next thing you'll see then is the local guard's son playing on the football team. And then all of a sudden, you have all these guys who are very, very easily identified because they're not white like me, are in and around the port, mending nets in full view of everybody, and we're walking, enjoying the ice cream and the ambience of the day, and nobody can see these people. It is simply, it's disheartening. It's embarrassing to say we're Irish, and this sort of carry on is going on. Now, if you leave Park Ken Fleming, forget my view, forget the view of the ITF or the trade union movement, and let's go to Greta. Let's go to the United Nations. 4 rapporteurs have already complained in writing to the Irish government about their miserable record in relation to stamping out human trafficking. They haven't even responded to those letters. The US State Department, 2 consecutive years, have downgraded Ireland from a status white, which is the top grade, and we're now sitting alongside Chad in relation to our human rights, documented by what the US State Department believe is our inactivity to defend workers when they find themselves in the hands of employers that exploit them. And yet, this means nothing to our state. It means nothing to a government that, while this is all going on, and that the second downgrading was only of June 2020, we're scurrying around the Leinster House to try and get a seat on the United Nations so as we can pontificate about standards in the rest of the world. When Ireland is an absolute disgrace to say that we were alongside India 2 years ago, and we've left them and we've moved down to the level alongside Chad. So I just wanted to have the opportunity to speak to ordinary people in Wexford. It's great that Brendan is listening, to say this is not Ken Fleming's view. This is a matter of fact. It's a disgrace. The Department of Justice in Ireland believe that all of those women that are involved in, if you leave the fishing industry out, all of those women that are here in Ireland are all delighted to be here, working in the sex industry. All of those poor Egyptians, Filipinos and Indonesians that are on the boats where the boat owners say they can't get workers are all delighted to be working up to 80 and 90 hours a week for the national minimum wage. Like, it beggars belief. All the au pairs are delighted to be getting £100 a day or £100 a week, while bold brats of the upper class are kicking the shins off them while they're struggling to keep them quiet because they're disturbing the people who are working at home in COVID-19. witnessed it myself here 3 weeks ago in the House. The mushroom industry, the meat industry, full of people on fortunes all the way from Brazil. Why, in the name of God, in an industry where we had the best boners in the world in the meat industry, that we have to go to Brazil to get people to work in that industry? Simple. Vulnerability, insecurity, the threat of a deportation or a report to the local guard to have you taken out of here unless you put up with the crap that I give you every day of the week to make me rich. That's Ireland, from my point of view, for the last 10 years. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Ken. Plenty of food for thought there for everybody. Folks, if you have any questions for Ken, if you send them in on either the question and answers or the chat box, and at the end. I now call on our second speaker, Esther Lynch. Welcome, Esther.
Thanks very much, Chair, and it's great to be here with my own Union Forcer, and want to thank in particular Fiona for reaching out and giving me the chance. I was listening to Ken, and I think the main message for me from what Ken was saying is how interconnected all of us are. We're interconnected as workers, we're interconnected as trade unionists, and we're interconnected in terms of Europe. And I think that's why Brexit is such a concern for all of us, because it's the same people, it's the same ethos and similar people who deliberately create situations of injustice, whether it's the reflagging of vessels, or whether it's the ignoring of the circumstances at the local or national level. It's the same ethos that's behind Brexit. It's about making sure that to destabilize, to put workers against each other, and to make and to try and get an advantage through a race to the bottom on standards. And that's why for the ETUC, so for all workers unionized throughout Europe, throughout the European Union, the important thing for all of us was to secure within the negotiation mandate for Michel Barnier the idea of the level playing field. And the idea of the level playing field was to make sure that the final deal that would be done would make sure that the UK would not be able to compete on a race to the bottom on employment rights, on equality rights, on rights relating to environment, on consumer rights, but also in relation to other social fiscal standards. And it's still unclear, even at this late stage, exactly what type of a deal we're going to get. So a no-deal Brexit will be a catastrophe. A bare deal Brexit will also be a catastrophe. We're very concerned that a deal that simply deals with goods only is 30% of the picture. It's not enough just to deal with how much goods moving around Europe should be taxed, because often with those goods and in the use of those goods, people need to move to provide the services. So if you can't have your qualifications recognized, well then oftentimes you can't use the goods. So, so it's really important that the Brexit deal deals with both goods and services. It's important that it deals with a level playing field so that we're not put all against each other. And it's important that the Brexit deal includes within it a credible complaint system, because we all saw what the UK decided to do with the international agreement, which was the withdrawal bill. So, so the rumours around Brussels today. So this often changes week by week and day by day. But the rumours around Brussels today are, and I'd be very interested in Ken and indeed Brendan's views on this, is that fisheries is still the major sticking point. That there's some text, we haven't seen it, and I only know this from rumours, and that there is some text dealing with non-regression. We had wanted a level playing field based on dynamic alignment. So if the EU adopted higher employment standards, that the UK would be obliged to adhere to them too. Now there's a discussion about non-regression, so not going back from the point of where we are now, but there seems to still be disagreement about baseline for the non-regression is. So how can they understand what they were committed to in the context of them not wanting to base it around EU laws. So, but there does seem to be some discussion relating to non-regression. There also seems to be some discussion relating to what's been called a Ratchet Clause. And what that is will be a mechanism by which the UK will be obliged to look at whatever the improvement in standards, whether it's employment standards, environmental, social, or other standards, that it would be obliged to consider adopting them. And if it didn't adopt them and thereby gained a competitive advantage, that there would be some mechanism by which competitive advantage could be complained about and dealt with. The other then issue being the state sub, and seems to me that the UK has lots of opportunities to secure, for example, a lot of jobs by means of state subsidies, but chose not to do it. But the state subsidies is a big sticking point still. And then finally having a credible mechanism by which if whatever the final deal ends up being isn't, that there would need to be a way to complain. And we're really trying to make sure that there is an ability for trade unions to be able to raise complaints, because obviously there's every danger that that workers' employment rights, in the same way as workers were used as bargaining chips, that workers' employment rights will be pushed way down the queue. So we want to make sure that there's a mechanism for involving unions. Then finally, we were successful in securing the Brexit Adjustment Fund. I think that is something. The ICTU was very active at European level in calling for. I think that at national level and at local level, this is something to identify the jobs that are at risk and to identify the type of supports that the Brexit Adjustment Fund could be sought by the union to make sure that there is, if you like, the workers that you're all representing aren't left holding the consequences for Brexit. So that's where I leave it. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions. The main point being where I started out, that for the ETUC we understand that it's not good for Europe to have workers at each other's throats. That what we need is a European trade union response. And that means like all of us taking the time to identify how we can all work and support each other. And that workers shouldn't end up carrying the can for all of this. And that's why the Brexit Adjustment Fund is really important. That's it. I'll wait for the questions.
Thanks very much for that, Esther. As I say, folks, get your questions in on the question and answers or on the chat box, and we'll put that to the panelists at the very end. I now welcome Brendan Howland.
Thanks, Kate. I hope you're hearing me loud and clear. it's compartmentalizing myself to refocus on Brexit. I've been sort of on justice issues all day, but I spent most of yesterday dealing with Brexit issues. Firstly, let me say thank you to you, Kate, for chairing it, for Fiona and Dave for the invitation just to present a perspective on Brexit and obviously a local perspective of the Southeast as well, although I want to say a few general words. It's also a pleasure to be on the same panel as Esther, who is an extraordinary champion of Ireland on the European front, and I wish you every success, continued success in that, and obviously with Ken, who has become a legend himself in terms of flying the flag for the most vulnerable that very few people even see, as he says himself. And I'm happy to share a platform with you all. Maybe the very first thing to say is give you a perspective on where we are in relation to Brexit. Brexit, as everybody knows, is entirely a bad news story. There's no upside. All we've been doing for the last 4 years is mitigating the downside, and that is particularly true for workers. The whole Brexit concept was driven by those in Britain who basically wanted to shed the structures and organisation of standards for workers, for the environment and so on that we built up over decades. And as somebody said, have a sort of a Singapore on the periphery of Europe with access to European markets. I'm afraid they convince an awful lot of working people for a variety of reasons to support that concept, which is certainly not in their interests. And I think that will be a very hard lesson for people to learn. So our job has been trying to mitigate that for a while. Obviously, the very first focus was the hard-won peace on the island of Ireland to preserve the Good Friday Agreement and all that means, that we weren't going back to a divided, physically divided island again. That would be a disaster, politically, economically, socially, and I think dangerous in terms of a possible return to violence. And in fairness, the first test was whether we would have solidarity from the European Union in relation to that. And I think the Brits didn't believe we would have it, but we did have it in spades. And the uniform view of the 27 in saying basically right now, there are only two issues that they want to preserve in the discussions. And that is the two priorities that everybody in Europe you talk to has is peace in Ireland and the Good Friday Agreement. And secondly, the protection of our own internal market. I spoke to Simon Coveney this afternoon, knowing that I was coming on here just to get an update. And I'm afraid to report that he's telling me the last couple of days have been very difficult. The chief negotiator, obviously, Michel Barnier, is self-isolating at the moment, but he had planned to come to London this weekend. He now, because of the negative vibes coming from Frost and Gove in London, has determined that he will only travel this weekend if there is real movement on the issues that Esther touched upon. And I'll just amplify in a minute. So I think if we want to signal if there's going to be real progress, it'll be whether Michel Barnier goes to London on Friday or Saturday. And that'll be a first signal for us. Coveney is of the view now that it is likely that there will be no substantial deal until the next European Council. That is the absolute deadline, which is the week after next. And I don't know how it's going to be ratified at that stage, but it will have to be ratified, and it might mean the European Parliament meeting between Christmas and New Year. Well, if that has to be done, that has to be done. The three outstanding issues, as have been ably instanced by Esther, are still the same. The level playing field, which is in essence standards, so that we don't allow goods manufactured with lesser workers' rights, lesser environmental standards, exploitation of people, free access into the European market. And that is an absolute final and line of no crossing from the European Union side. And that hasn't been agreed. Related to that is the governance issue. And the governance issue, obviously, is that if there is a breach of the law, or breach of the standards. And Esther has talked about, for example, if trade unions recognise that there is exploited work entering the European Union, that there'll be some mechanism to redress that. And unfortunately, that has been worsened by the introduction in Britain of the Internal Market Bill, Section 5 of which basically tears up the withdrawal agreement that we just negotiated less than 12 months ago. And so we need some legally binding way of ensuring that if there's a deal struck, that it can be enforced with consequences for Britain. And the third critical issue is the issue of fisheries. I've been involved in this discussion for last 4 years, and we always knew that for most of the bilateral discussion between the European Union and the United Kingdom, Europe had the stronger hand. But on fisheries, Britain has the stronger hand because they have more territorial waters. And that's why we wanted it settled before the main trade deal. And unfortunately, that has not proven possible. But it would be really very, very lamentable if we couldn't settle the matter of fisheries, which has now been raised from its economic importance, which obviously is in a place like Wexford. But it is now almost a totemic thing of an issue of sovereignty for Britain. And I'm told in recent days that things have gone backwards rather than forwards on that issue. And that is profoundly worrying. I also had a meeting with the French ambassador last week, and a little bit worryingly, because the French are obviously very strong on the fisheries side. They're talking about no deal being preferable to what has been described as a thin deal, a bare bones deal. So on the basis that the disruption to Britain would be so severe that they'd come back to the table in a better mood to negotiate. But that is a very risky strategy, and certainly for us, we are collateral damage in that in a way that would be entirely unjustifiable. In our own preparations, we have enacted last night, and thank you for moving this seminar to facilitate the enactment last night, and I was involved in it, of the Brexit Omnibus Bill, which is an extraordinary, long, complicated piece of legislation, 100 pages of text involving 11 government departments and covering everything we can think of. In essence, and I'll answer any questions anybody has on it, it covers basically embedded in law the common travel area to ensure that Irish citizens will continue to enjoy full rights of the United Kingdom after Brexit, and UK citizens here. It underscores the rights of Northern Irish citizens to continue to have full economic and social rights in the European Union. Rights, for example, if they travel abroad, to have access to European healthcare, or access to Horizon programs and all the other programs that people enjoy. There is an issue, and maybe from a trade union perspective, I've been asked by one trade union today just an update on it, and that is the cross-border medical care, because a lot of unions actually fund their members to do that. That is not agreed yet, but it's hopeful that it will be agreed early in the new year. Again, I'll answer any questions that people might have on that. The bill covers everything from business to transport and so on. But I want to mention, particularly with respect to Kate's introduction, the issue of connectivity. I've been banging a drum for a very long time that a critical part of Ireland's continued well-being will be the ability to get our goods off this island into our continental markets. As of now, about 150,000 trucks a year use what's called the British Land Bridge. In other words, they'll go from Dublin through Britain into France, or from Rosslare through Pembroke Dock, or through Fishguard into across Britain into France. If there is disruption, and there will be disruption if there's no deal, that could be very difficult for Irish exports and imports. So I've been banging the drum to try and get more connectivity directly. I have a bit of good news, Kate. I'm not allowed to tell you yet because there'll be an announcement tomorrow at 12 o'clock And why I can't announce it, it's in relation to Rosslare, and a very significant, in fact, game-changing development there is that the announcement is stock market sensitive. So I'm afraid I can't give any details, but it's a project that I've worked with others over the last eight months to try and fulfill, to give much more options for direct connectivity out of Rosslare, because I think Dublin Port is very vulnerable, as we've seen in the practices they've done. If there's any difficulties with the port, the notion that you're going to have trucks lined up to Dublin Airport, or if the port tunnel was for any reason closed, it would cease to function. We need to have significant options. I'm going to just say one sentence in relation to the points Ken made on workers' rights generally, because I have been obviously working with a variety of workers, and I would add to the list that he has listed the issue of bogus self-employment, where some fishermen that I've dealt with operating in our own county are required by boat owners to pretend to be self-employed, although for all means and proper designation, they're employees, but there's a lot of that about. The Brexit Adjustment Fund is a significant amount. Well, it's 5 billion euros. We have notions that it is going to be largely ours because we're going to be the most affected. The French have other notions, and we've seen today that the French believe that they're going to get the lion's share of it. So that'll be another issue to be determined. My very final comment, this intervention, and then, as I say, I'll be delighted to answer any questions, any matter, is we have to look beyond Brexit too for the future of Europe. And there's going to be a major new conference, a major new debate. It's already started in terms of the grounding we've done on what the next phase of Europe will look like. And it is really, really important for trade unionists to be involved from the beginning of this, that this is not, a boss's project. We have to construct a new vision of Europe based on the social values that we share. And that has started. Antonio Costa, who's an extraordinarily impressive socialist Prime Minister of Portugal, has made a very important contribution on that. And I look forward to certainly inputting over the next 2 years, or at least 18 months, while the grounding documents for the next phase of European development post-Brexit is mapped out. Thanks, Kate.
Thanks, Brendan. And I'll wait with bated breath tomorrow what this big announcement is going to be at 12 o'clock. But anyway, folks, questions are flying in here. So the first one comes in from one of my esteemed colleagues in Galway, Tom Brown. And he says, hi, Kate, can you ask Ken what local trade councils and trade union activists can do to lobby and campaign to improve the employment rights of exploited non-national workers? So you come back into us, Ken, please.
Yeah, I suppose and it's a good question, and it's one that I ask myself every day, what next can we do? Because as I said, we took a High Court action or a injunction against the Minister for Justice to close down the very permit scheme that Simon Coveney devised to protect the workers. And you see, I didn't really want to go off into the trafficking side of it, because listening to Brendan and Esther, they're really focusing on Brexit. So I'm just going to swerve back to it. And I'm going to say that I'm hoping Brendan is going to announce we've extra capacity now going to operate out of the southeast. Ask yourself the question. Go back to Bertie Ahern when he was the Taoiseach, and we had that big row in Irish ferries, and all those jobs, 600 jobs, well-paid jobs, overnight gone on the basis that the company could go off and reflag out to the Bahamas and get rid of all of the staff, go off to Eastern Europeans, bring in a whole load of really, really good, well-trained workers, and simply pay them absolutely nothing compared to what the previous workers used to enjoy. Now, all of the business that should come into Rosslare in order to move us directly to France or Europe. It's all going to be shipping. 80% of the world's produce goes by sea. Brendan picked up on my remark about we can't see the exploitation. Why are the ships going to come in? Flagged in Barbuda, in Cyprus, in the Marshall Islands, and every person visible to us will be from another continent. They won't even be from Europe. There's the first very visible start of the exploitation that was allowed to destroy the entire maritime industry in Europe. And it's about to show its face in a very real way on the shores of Wexford. That's the first thing we know is going to happen. So if you go to the Trades Council question about what can we do? Well, we know this happens in the maritime sector because it's happened everywhere else. So can we make a decision tonight? Could Brendan or anybody on the panel, and you go to Esther with this connectivity, we don't need to have connectivity to preempt what's going to happen in relation to very well, highly skilled produced produce transported now by people on boats flagged elsewhere to avoid the Irish, the English and the European legislation, carrying a rate of pay of $1,800 a month for 273 hours. Work it out. It's $4.70 an hour. And that's what we're going to. I'm making this prediction. We're going to allow, even with all of this development and jobs that we think are coming to Ireland, if we need to increase our capacities to ignore the UK and go straight to Europe, we're going to allow a situation where all of the produce will arrive and leave Wexford, the coast of Wexford, with workers who are being exploited if you compare them to the rate of pay they should be enjoying while working in Europe, because they're working in Europe. And yet the fishing industry can claim territorial rights on the water, saying this is English waters. So if it's English waters, why aren't we paying English national minimum wage? If it's Irish waters, why are we not paying Irish national minimum wage? Why is the colour of the flag on the stern of the ship being used to determine the conditions of employment? Now, that, delegates, is going to happen as soon as Rosslare expands. It's already happening in Rosslare. It's already happening in Dublin Port. It's already happening in Belfast Port and Cork Port. And yet we're going to sit by and allow it happen in a development scenario in Rosslare on the basis that Brexit is going to cause us to increase our capacity into mainland Europe.
Thanks for that, Ken. I'm sure that we'll have a very close eye on that, and we'll do what we can here in the Trades Council movement to support anything that going forward. And the next question is coming in from County Kerry, from Kevin O'Malley. Given that so much of our policies and legislation is based on British models, is there a real danger that we will find ourselves moving away from our European partners? And how do we move to take our lead from Europe? And maybe I'll give that to you, Esther.
Yeah, so it's true. Very often what you see happening is wherever the company has their head office, that the policies and ideas and culture that's in the head office is transplanted into the regions where they have different branches of the company. I think that one of the ways that unions can counteract that, rather than always looking just to legislation, is that we can begin to make that work for us. So what we can do is that where a company has trade unions in the head office and they recognize the union in the head office, that what we should be doing is working closer with the union in the head office to say it's a problem because in their operations in Ireland, they're not recognizing the union. And that being very relevant for a lot of, we say, European companies operating in Ireland. You could think of IKEA as a good example. So I think that we need to develop joined up trade union responses, that we look to use where we're strong, to bargain where we're weaker, to help us bargain where we're weaker. I think then, I mean, there's no hiding the catastrophe that is Brexit. There's no point in hiding that or trying to patch over it, or other than to say that that's exactly what it is. But at the same time, we have to come up with strategies to counteract it. So that's why trade unions, indeed with the full support of the TUC, are looking to secure what we're calling the level playing field, to make sure that it's not the case that there can be a competitive advantage sought for companies operating out of the UK, so that they can seek to make sure that their profits are bigger, or that they can be successful enterprises on the basis of lower pay terms and conditions. I think looking at Ken's point, which is about the minimum wages of seafarers, and he's absolutely right about that. The injustice of it is outrageous. But I think we could campaign and secure within the proposed directive of minimum wages and collective bargaining that the EU is currently now discussing, that the minimum wages would operate for the whole of the territory, including for vessels operating. So there is an opportunity to do something on that. But what it would need is for all of us to get very active in shouting for it, and not to leave it just to those vulnerable seafarers to do it themselves. That what this needs is joined up trade unionism. It needs a vision of European trade unionism, where exactly what I know, Forset, one Galway, one Cork, and I was saying this, so one Galway, one Ireland, one Europe. You know, so that's the type of approach that we need, and we need to make sure that we're all standing up for those seafarers as well. And that directive on minimum wages and collective bargaining could be the route to do it.
Okay, thanks, Esther. Folks, there's loads of questions coming in, and I know because of the time constraint, we're not going to get through them all. However, we are going to take note of them all, and we will reply out to you after this webinar with the answers or with some feedback to the questions you're asking. I have two questions in from Don Dean, and I'm going to give these over to Brendan. Is there any move to regulate the use of the City of London in insurance and banking in the EU? And the second question is it not true that the fisheries overlap and that we, Ireland, have more fishing areas that are disputed than in the rest of Europe put together?
I'd say Brendan will want that one.
You're on mute, Brendan, yeah. Can you unmute Brendan, Hazel? We can't hear you, Brendan, so if you just hang on for a sec. Come in, Hazel.
Maybe if we just move on to the next question, Kate, and Brendan, if you could maybe try plugging out your headset and using the mic on the computer you're using.
Is that all right?
Oh, there we go.
That's right. There you go. The old headset didn't suit. Just in terms of insurance, it was covered in the Brexit Omnibus Bill. And for example, in banking, the central clearing house that was London we've now legally designated a European clearinghouse in Belgium. I think you'll see it's going to be complicated for a while in terms of a lot of business that is now centred in the City of London. Some of it has already moved to European Union centres. Dublin doing reasonably well from all of that. Hopefully we can regionalise that away from Dublin as well over time. But I think that a lot of people in the City of London were awaiting the final deal. Esther mentioned the fact that services, which is the great bulk of British business, is unlikely to be covered in financial services in any deal that is settled within the foreseeable future. It is interesting that when you listen to British ministers, they talk about getting a Canadian-style deal. Of course, a Canada-style deal excludes services, and that's the bulk of their business in the United Kingdom. So I think that you'll see much more European-centric insurance being provided, much more European-centric bank clearing being provided in the next short while, I think to the detriment of the City of London. In terms of the fishing question, there are disputed waters, some of them literally on the island of Ireland, just in territorial seas that didn't have to be delineated until now, and that will cause some friction, I have no doubt, in coming times. But the big issue, obviously, is that Britain wants exclusive use to their own territorial waters for fishing purposes. I listened to the Vice President of the European Parliament on BBC say that that's well and good. If we allow then Britain to catch all the fish, are they going to eat all the fish? Because 2/3 of all the fish that they catch is exported to the European Union. And it will be a matter that I think will be very difficult to resolve because it hasn't been resolved to date. And there will be individual disputes about locations that didn't have to be determined specifically when we were all part of a common fisheries policy, but will have to be after the 1st of January.
Thanks, Brendan. And I suppose I better take a question that's coming in from our own chairperson, Mr. Michael Wall, because otherwise I mightn't live to see tomorrow. What kind of new social contract should we be seeking in the post-Brexit? I don't know who wants to. Do you want to take that one again, Brendan?
It sounds like a question for Esther than myself. It's a trade union specific question in terms of the new social contract. My own view is we have a really important new focus post-Brexit. Ireland is almost fixated by Brexit because it's so impactful on us. But for many of the 27, it is very peripheral. If you're in the Baltics, if you're in the eastern part of the European Union, Brexit is very peripheral to you. And many European countries have seen Britain as a country that was always semi-detached from the European project. And there will be people who will want to reignite the European project, and people have to have a vision of what exactly that means. And it means different things to different countries. I instanced Antonio Costa, a man that I've met a few times and whom I have huge admiration for, the Socialist Prime Minister of Portugal. He has made a very important speech on Monday, which basically, I wouldn't agree with the main tenet of the speech, which basically says that the next phase will involve a two-speed Europe, an inner core of European nations that want closer integration, that want issues like debt sharing, which is a good idea. So that we're like a federated country like America, where that if a poor country can borrow money at the same rates as a rich country, and the debt is mutualized, that we have common standards of decency in terms of environmental standards, labour standards and that. But that would mean a number of other things like common taxation. We're going to have a very serious debate on all of that and the mutualisation of things like burden sharing on migrants. Because, you know, with all due respect to all of us, we can all pontificate about migrants and the lack of a policy to allow migrants into Europe. Well, Ireland is abysmally poor at taking migrants, and those countries that have seen very great upheavals in their politics with the rise of far right and sometimes fascist political parties. So I think the trade union movement will now have to have a parallel process, because the Future of Europe project is starting. It was started by the French president in a speech he gave. They're about to appoint a new chairperson to drive the process, and the idea is that you will have. Initially, it was hoped by the end of next year, but I think now because of COVID, it'll be the end of the year after. A different model for post-Brexit Europe, and we have to, as a trade union movement and allied political parties, make it a social Europe.
Thanks, Brendan. And listen, folks, we're not going to get around to them all. We're down to our last 2 minutes, and I'm just going to finish up the webinar by saying a huge thank you to our 3 panelists. I think everybody say it's been great, and we got the cream of the crop, as it were. Before we sign off, there's a couple of notices which I want to alert you to. This webinar series is continuing, and the next one is taking place on Wednesday, the 9th of December, and that's been hosted by the One Cork and the Cork Council of Trade Unions, and their topic is going to be on apprenticeships. So hopefully you'll all be able to log in on Wednesday, the 9th of December. I want to thank you all for your participation. As I say, most notably our 3 panelists. A special word of thanks to Fiona Dunn, who, without her support, this thing would never have happened, and she's got us from all around the country taking part in this. And the other person who I'd like to give a huge thank you to, who I have probably drove her crazy all week, and that's Hazel Gavigan, who was the host in the background here tonight. So on that note, folks, enjoy the rest of your evening. Hopefully we'll all get to meet again soon, and thank you very much for taking part in this webinar.
Thank you.